I'm Inigo Mujika. I'm a sports physiologist working at USP Araba Sport Clinic, and I'm an associate professor at the University of the Basque Country. The topic of today's talk is nutrition for team sports. In today's talk, we are going to cover the physiological characteristics of team sports, the nutritional factors that could induce fatigue in team sports, the influence of the diet on team sports performance, and we will also look at whether team sport athletes are keeping proper dietary habits to enhance their performance. We will have a look at the influence of fluid and energy intake during team sport activity. And finally, we will consider supplements and team sport performance with particular interest on creatine supplementation. When we think about the activity pattern of football match play, we have to consider that distance covered is not enough to give us an idea of the type of metabolic demands of the sport. If we only look at the distance covered, we would think that a football player would have to train and have the same metabolic demands as a 10-kilometer runner. So as you can see in this slide, the activity pattern of football players changes from walking to jogging to cruising to sprinting, and the frequency of this activity pattern changes about 850 times every game. In addition to this, players perform between 10 and 20 tackles per game and also 9 to 15 headings in each game. And this places special demands on the metabolic pathways of these players, and we need to take into consideration these demands at the time of making our nutritional recommendations. It is important to have a look at the physiological response of football players during actual match play, because this indicates that there is an important tax on the cardiovascular system. The player's heart rate is very close to their peak values during many minutes during the first half and also during many minutes during the second half. And this indicates that the cardiovascular requirements of football match play are very important. But when we look at blood concentration of lactate throughout the game, we also see that sometimes blood concentration values go up to 10, 12, even 14 millimoles, which suggests that there are very high demands on the glycolytic pathways in addition to the demands on the cardiovascular system. It is important to know that nutritional factors that induce fatigue in endurance sport can also induce fatigue in team sport settings, like for example in football match play. If we look at this slide, we see that when football players start a match with high enough glycogen concentration, this will allow them to get to the halftime with enough glycogen in their muscles, and even to the end of the game with enough glycogen in their muscles to maintain their activity pattern in the second half of the game at a comparable level as they had in the first half of the game. On the other hand, when players start the game with a low glycogen level, we see that by the time they finish the first half of the game, their glycogen level is so low that they are actually unable to maintain their activity profile in the second half. And as you can see here, by the time they finish the game, their glycogen concentration is down to 0. Dehydration is also a factor that could induce performance in team sports. As we know, as body mass goes down because of dehydration, the exercise capacity of players can also go down in such a way that by the time they reach a decrement in their body mass of 2%, their performance capacity might have gone down by 5 to 10%. In addition, when players are not provided with enough fluid during match play, their RPE, or rating of perceived exertion, is going to go up linearly for the duration of the game, whereas when they are provided with fluid, it might go up at the beginning of the game, but then it stabilizes and they can finish the game with the same rating of perceived exertion as they had about halftime. Does dehydration occur during football match play? Well, as you can see in this table, in spite of weather conditions sometimes not being too stressful, as we can see, sometimes we might have an environmental temperature that it's not too high, like for example 13 degrees and only 7% relative humidity, and the sweat loss might reach up to 1 liter. If players are not replacing that sweat loss, they might end up having hypohydration that might impair their performance. Obviously, if the environmental conditions get more stressful, like for example 33 degrees and 40% relative humidity, in this situation, even though the players are taking in some fluid, their body mass is going to get reduced and therefore their performance might be impaired. Carbohydrate intake is also going to have an effect on the skills performance of players. So when we provide enough carbohydrate and electrolytes during the game, the players are better able to maintain their skill ability at the end of the game. In this study, players were provided with frequent boluses of carbohydrate and electrolytes, and at the end of the game, they had to perform a specific soccer skill test. And they were able to maintain their precision, their power, their coordination, and their dribbling ability at the end of the game much better than they were able to maintain it when they were given a placebo that contained nor carbohydrate nor electrolytes. One thing that nutrition practitioners should keep in mind is that gastric emptying seems to be impaired during football match play. In this graph, we can see that gastric emptying is much lower when athletes are performing a simulation of football on the treadmill, that is high-intensity intermittent exercise, in comparison when they are performing low-intensity continuous exercise like walking on the treadmill. Therefore, the amount of carbohydrate that we need to provide to athletes is probably much higher in the case of a high-intensity intermittent activity like team sport in comparison with low-intensity continuous activity. One of the most popular supplements in team sports is creatine. And in the past, we have done some interesting research on acute creatine supplementation with football players. For example, in this study with the Australian women's national team, we did a protocol that mimicked the activity pattern of these particular players during tournament match play. And what we are seeing here is a graph that indicates that when we did repeated sprinting, these athletes were able to maintain a much faster sprinting velocity for the duration of the exercise test that included 55 maximal sprints in comparison when they were given a placebo. As you can see here, the placebo group did not improve the performance in these 55 sprints, whereas the creatine group had a consistently faster performance in these sprints. Several authors have looked at the effects of chronic creatine supplementation on repeated effort performance. And most of the studies that are available to date indicate that whether this creatine supplementation lasts for 4 weeks or all the way to 2 months is going to have a beneficial effect on team sport athletes so that they can improve their performance in repeated sprints or in repeated high intensity type of efforts. Thank you for your attention.